There is a saying that whenever we step on 1,000 paths, or something like that. The idea is that with every step comes 1,000 choices, or 1,000 paths for us to choose to walk down. And thus life is a constantly having to choose. And thus, we must constantly be vigilant about the paths our choices lead us down. I say this because the problem that we're facing, or the predicament that we're currently in, because we're facing more than just one problem. So the predicament that we're in is a lot like the predicament the Avengers were in that crappy Endgame movie, where there are 1,000 options for us, millions of options for us to choose from, but only one will lead to us successfully resolving this predicament. So I want to start by stating a couple possible options for this next step, and then as I state them, I'm going to explain why they are not viable options. Okay, I'm going to start with the first option, and that option is for the law enforcement community and the military to get together and arrest all the criminals. However, there's a couple problems with this. One, many in the law enforcement community and military are too comfortable with their cushy jobs. Or, if they're not too comfortable with their cushy jobs, they're directly connected to the criminals. These criminals, this criminal cartel, they most definitely have their tentacles in everything, including heads in the law enforcement community and heads of the military. The other issue is that even if you do this, the people in these communities, they don't know anything about what government should replace this government. If anything, they will very likely keep the same Constitution because they've been brainwashed to believe that the Constitution is the greatest government in the world. So they'll keep the Constitution, and it'll just be a matter of years before the power that the Constitution grants the federal government ends up corrupting the individuals within the federal government. You know, it's kind of like that saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, believe it or not, the Constitution does grant, in a lot of ways, absolute power. Some of the anti-federalists actually said that the Constitution that we have actually grants more power to the federal government than the King of England at the time could ever dream of having. That was at the time of the anti-federalists. I know, there's no King of England now. I actually had some idiot comment on that. I mentioned that, and the person was like, "There's no King of England now." It's like, damn, dude, you fucking slow as hell, man. Try to keep up with the conversation. So that's the first option, this kind of military coup. As I said, not a viable option. Not only is it not a viable option, but to me it seems like an option that will lead to quite a bit of bloodshed and violence. And I don't like violence or bloodshed, at least not on a societal level. So the second option is for 95% of the people, including all of the mindless, materialistic zombies who got the COVID shots, to get together and stop letting the criminal class get away with what they're doing. However, this kind of goes back to... There's a couple things here. Well, one, even if this could possibly happen, which I don't think it's going to happen. Our society is way too divided, so this is never going to happen. But even, let's say, a magical dragon came out of the sky and united 95% of the world, or 95% of the people, against the criminal class. All you're going to have there is a classic case of the revolt of the masses, where because a large majority of the people are unqualified to do anything, really, what's going to happen is these 95% of the people, they'll all just get together and they'll just fuck everything up. You know, to understand why this is a problem, I suggest everyone read Jose Ortega y Gasset's The Revolt of the Masses, so you can understand why mass movements just do not work. Okay, and the founding fathers of this country did not need 95% of the people to get on board. Actually, what happened was our founding fathers, they were actually a minority who just knew how to organize the masses. They were smart, they were intelligent, they had a plan of action, and they carried out that plan of action with a great deal of strategy. I mean, what they did was very clever. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't look to them for the solution to this current problem. However, that's what I did. So to understand how to successfully pull off the next revolution without any violence on our part, we have to understand exactly how the last one was pulled off. I could say a whole bunch of things. I could talk about, Ortega talked about why we don't look to the past for solutions anymore, and this is a digression. And basically, in The Revolt of the Masses, he talks about how we no longer look to the past for advice because we think that we've become better than the past. We think that we're just so much better than any historical period that we don't bother either looking to the past standards or looking to the past for help. Okay, so that was a digression. So anyway, we have to look at how our founding fathers did this in order to do this ourselves. So the oversimplified version of what our founding fathers did was as follows. So the last revolution started as protest. Then, as the British government began to piss off more and more colonists, the colonists began to communicate with each other using the committees of correspondence. And eventually, the colonists came up with the idea to work together to fight for their independence. Okay, this is an oversimplified version that doesn't help us out at all, really. The more complicated version is that the colonists were already pretty organized. And by that, I mean the colonists already had their own governments that were pretty autonomous from the British government. In order to understand this, you have to understand the salutary neglect, or basically how Britain neglected the colonies because they were at war with, I believe, France at the time. So they focused so much on that war, and that allowed the colonists to not only develop basically their own autonomous governments, but also allowed them to develop, this sense of independence. This whole period of salutary neglect is actually what led to the colonists also, standing up for themselves, because they realized, like, wait a second, we don't need these kings. We don't need them. We can just do it ourselves. So the American Revolution was really more like these relatively small governments relative to the British Empire who decided they worked together to fight for their independence. Of course, they weren't the ones who shot the first shot. It's debated who shot the first shot. I just want to make it clear. It's not like our plan, or it's not like this solution. It's not like I'm advocating for us to come together and declare war against anybody. No, this is supposed to be a completely peaceful process. So what happened in the past was more of a replacing an old government with a relatively new government of sorts. And this is what needs to be done when confronting these people, is not fight them, but rather set up a new government to replace them. And somebody actually commented on my previous video. I forget the exact quote. I've used the quote so many times where it's like, you don't tear down the system. If there's a problem with the system, you don't tear it down with violence and basically end up hurting yourself. No, you don't do that. You instead do a more constructive thing, and you construct something new to replace that thing. So that's the first thing that we need to do. We need to create the framework for a new government. The next step is creating a framework for a new government. Then we need to have positions filled in this new government, either via elections or however we decide people will hold public office in this new system. I myself think there is a way to do away with these democratic elections that allow for all this corruption and meddling. And not only does it do away with this voting system, it's completely corruption-proof, and it kind of makes sure that everyone in society who wants to gets to play a role in government, at least for a certain period of time. But that's a conversation for a completely different video. Okay, I'll probably be making that video sometime in the near future, because that video it's kind of like the next step. It's part of the framework of this new government. I'm sure you guys probably know, I already have all of this shit figured out. I know exactly what kind of new government we can use. It's a totally brand new government, and as I just said, I believe, as far as I can tell, it's corruption-proof. There is no way for corruption to take root in this new system. But that's, as I said, for another video. So after we have a comprehensive government that has elected representatives, we won't jump to declaring ourselves the legitimate government. Instead, we will campaign and hold mock independence ceremonies to get our message out. And our message will be a simple message that I think everyone can agree with, which is our liberties, lives, and our very world And the liberties, lives, and world of our children are not secured by this government. This government does not, clearly, objectively, this is not my opinion, historical events have proven this, this government does not secure our liberties, our lives, or our planet. It's very obvious, okay? And I think that everyone on both the right and the left can agree with this. And it's my hope that eventually this mock government we create will become the real government, either through some sort of popular referendum or some other means. Maybe it might be possible for communities to declare their independence from this government and just like stop paying their taxes and claim that they are now citizens of this new government and start following whatever system of taxation it has. By the way, I have a whole system of taxation for this system. It's not, I know I say taxes and you guys are probably like, taxation is theft. Trust me, it's a whole system for how things can get resolved in this system, because believe it or not, you do need an independent, neutral third party it's complicated. But once again, it's for a separate video. But essentially, maybe this is another option where people can say, because government derives its power from the people, maybe we don't have to do the popular referendum. You know, I'm pretty sure if I'm thinking correctly, there's a way to give up your citizenship and remain in the United States. I think it's part of the whole sovereign citizen thing. Like, you have to hand in your social security card or something like that. So imagine if millions of people just did this. They just hand in their social security card. They're like, hey, no, look, I'm no longer a citizen of your government. However, I'm staying in the United States because I was born here. You know, I have a right to reside on the land that I was born on or born in. And then they can say, look, you know, now our new government is this other government. And then they can go about becoming citizens or whatever, however that new government's framework works, okay? So just imagine if millions of Americans did that. You know, especially if they did this like after having these protests, like after having these mock independence ceremonies. What if we gave like a countdown and we let this government know, like, hey, look, we're doing this over the next 5 years, and after that, if you haven't got your shit into order, if this tyrannies continue, we're just going to hand in our social security cards. We're all going to go there. We're going to give up our citizenship, and we're going to declare you no longer our legitimate government. Maybe we'll do something like that. So that's what I think the next solution is. I know I like fucking jumping all over the place. You guys are probably like, oh, I don't even know what the next solution is. You said so much shit that now you're saying that's the next solution, and you guys are probably just there scratching your head like, wait a second, what's the next solution? So I'll just sum it up, okay? So the next step is, as I said, to create a framework, a working framework for a new government. After creating a working framework for a new government and having people in various states agree with it, you know, they give the thumbs up. They're like, yeah, that works, buddy. After doing that, you know, we'll have our committees of correspondence kind of, you know, giving the okay for that. I don't know if we want to do that, as I said, on these platforms and, you know, using these means of communication the government can spy on. I don't know if we want to continue to use that, but maybe we can. I don't think it should be too much of an issue, because it's not like we're doing anything criminal. We're just standing up for our rights. You know, we're not planning anything violent or anything like that. As you guys heard here, all my steps, none of them involve violence. None of them really involve civil disobedience or any of that. You know, I say create a new government, do some mock independence ceremonies, get word of the new government out, do some grassroots movements with that, and then hopefully within 5 years, enough people are aware of the truth of this government and are aware that there's an alternative government for something to happen. I don't know what that something is, but that's the only solution, guys. You guys can go out there, you can protest, as I said in the other video. It's only going to be a short-term solution. Long term, they'll find some way to continue their tyranny, to continue their hidden agenda. And that's the fact, you know, no matter what you choose. You guys can get millions of people out there. You can get fucking, as I said, you can get 95% of the people out there. It's not going to solve the issue. It's not going to solve the root problem. Those 95% of people, they can run all the people out of office. Guess what? This cult, this club, will eventually get its people back into office, and it'll just be a matter of time before we find ourselves in this predicament again. So it's the ball's in our court, you know. What do we want to do? Do we want to keep pussyfooting around? Do we want to keep just putting a bandage over the issue? Do we want to keep just treating the symptoms to the problem? Or do we want to address the actual problem? And that problem is this Constitution, this government. It has allowed for all of this. Not only did it allow for all of this, it was designed for this. Okay, the Anti-Federalists, they knew all of this shit was going to happen way back in fucking the 1780s. Okay, when this government was just being drafted, when this Constitution was just being drafted, they called all of this. They knew it was all going to happen. And you guys can drain the swamp, but if you don't have a new government that actually secures our liberty set up, you're just either going to create a power vacuum, or you're just going to end up feeding the machine. So anyway, that's where I leave it. I'll see you fellow slaves in the next video. For the tonic that keeps the mass man in form is insincerity, the joke. All his actions are devoid of the note of inevitability. They are done as the fils de famille carries out his escapades. All that haste, in every order of life, to adopt tragic, conclusive, final attitudes is mere appearance. Men play at tragedy because they do not believe in the reality of the tragedy which is actually being staged in the civilized world. It would be a nice matter if we were forced to accept as the genuine self of an individual whatever he tried to make us accept as such. If anyone persists in maintaining that he believes 2 and 2 make 5, and there is no reason for supposing him to be insane, we may be certain that he does not believe it, however much he may shout it out, or even if he allows himself to be killed for maintaining it. A hurricane of farciality, everywhere and in every form, is at present raging over the lands of Europe. Almost all the positions taken up and proclaimed are false ones. The only efforts that are being made are to escape from our real destiny, to blind ourselves to its evidence, to be deaf to its deep appeal, to avoid facing up to what has to be. We are living in comic fashion. All the more comic, the more apparently tragic is the mask adopted. The comic exists wherever life has no basis of inevitableness, on which a stand is taken without reserves. The masked man will not plant his foot on the immovably firm ground of his destiny. He prefers a fictitious existence suspended in air. Hence, never as now have we had these lives without substance or root, Damascenes from their own destiny, which let themselves float on the lightest current. This is the epoch of currents and of letting things slide. Hardly anyone offers any resistance to the superficial whirlwinds that arise in art, in ideas, in politics, or in social usages. Consequently, rhetoric flourishes more than ever. The surrealist thinks he has outstripped the whole of literary history when he has written, here a word there is no need to write, where others have written jasmines, swans, and fawns. But what he has really done has been simply to bring to light another form of rhetoric which hitherto laid hidden in the latrines. The Revolt of the Masses by Jose Ortega y Gasset.